Why is my name on a deed transferring Grandma's house? Just sign it, the wedding is starting. Too late. Every word you said was recorded.
3 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I heard my mother say, "Once she signs it, the house belongs to us." Then my sister laughed and replied, "She'll be too emotional to read anything." They were talking about me, and the house they planned to steal was the one my late grandmother had left in my name. Hello, my name is Claire Bennett. I was 34 years old when the people I trusted most tried to turn my wedding day into the perfect crime. I had spent my whole life believing family problems could be fixed with patience, loyalty, and forgiveness. By sunset that day, I understood something much harder. Some people do not mistake kindness for love. They mistake it for permission. That Saturday morning began exactly the way I had imagined. My bridesmaids were getting ready at a small hotel outside Charleston, South Carolina. The room smelled like hairspray coffee and white roses. My dress hung beside the window in a garment bag, and every few minutes someone reminded me to breathe. I was marrying Daniel Reed, a calm, thoughtful man who worked as a civil engineer. We had been together for 4 years. He knew my family could be difficult, but he never pressured me to choose between them and him. That was one reason I loved him. At 11:15, I realized my grandmother's pearl hairpin was missing. I had left it at my sister Vanessa's house after the rehearsal dinner. The hairpin was not expensive, but Grandma Evelyn had worn it at her own wedding. After she died, it became the one object I wanted with me when I married Daniel. Vanessa lived 12 minutes from the hotel. I told my maid of honor, Maya, that I would be back in half an hour. She offered to go for me, but I said no. I needed a few quiet minutes away from the noise. When I reached Vanessa's house, her car and my parents' SUV were both in the driveway. I assumed they had stopped there before heading to the venue. The front door was unlocked. "Vanessa," I called. No one answered. I walked to one guest bedroom where I had changed clothes the night before. As I reached the hallway, I heard voices coming from Vanessa's office. The door was almost closed. My father spoke first. "What if Daniel's attorney looks at the papers?" Vanessa answered in a low, impatient voice. "He won't be there when she signs. I'll give her the folder in the bridal suite. I'll say it's the final vendor release for the reception." Then my mother said the sentence that stopped me cold. "Once she signs it, the house belongs to us." There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of sliding across a desk. Vanessa laughed. "Claire reads every contract like she's preparing for trial. But today, she'll be crying, people will be pulling at her dress, and the photographer will be calling her name. She'll sign, wherever I put the little yellow flag." My knees nearly gave out. The house could only mean Grandma Evelyn's property on Sullivan's Island. It was a weathered blue cottage near the water, worth far more than it had been 10 years earlier. Grandma had left it to me because I had cared for her during the last 3 years of her life. My parents had never accepted that decision. They said the cottage should have been divided equally. Vanessa said Grandma had not been thinking clearly. But Grandma's will had been reviewed by 2 attorneys, and her doctor had confirmed she was mentally capable when she signed it. After the estate closed, my family stopped arguing openly. I thought they had finally accepted it. I was wrong. They had simply changed strategies. I took out my phone and started recording. My hand shook so badly that I nearly dropped it. "Father said, and the sale agreement with Mercer." "Ready?" Vanessa replied. "He wires the deposit Monday. We pay off your tax debt. I get the down payment for the salon. And Claire gets told the property was transferred into a family trust for protection." My mother sounded nervous. "She'll find out eventually. After the honeymoon," Vanessa said. "By then Mercer will have filed everything. We'll tell her Daniel pressured her to keep the house away from us, and we were only protecting Grandma's legacy. Claire always wants peace. She'll be furious for a week, then she'll forgive us." That sentence hurt more than the theft. She will forgive us. They had built their entire plan around the person I had always been. My father asked, "What about the notary?" Vanessa replied, "Derek owes me. He'll stamp it tonight and date it before the ceremony." I knew Derek Hale. He was Vanessa's on and off boyfriend and a commissioned notary. I also knew that notarizing my signature without watching me sign would be illegal. I backed away from the office door. Every instinct told me to burst inside and confront them. But another voice, calmer and colder, told me not to waste the only advantage I had. They did not know I knew. I slipped into the guest room, found Grandma's pearl hairpin, and left through the back door. Inside my car, I locked the doors and listened to the recording. Their voices were clear. For 1 full minute, I could not move. Then my phone rang. It was Vanessa. "Where are you?" she asked brightly. "At the hotel." I lied. "Why?" "Just checking. I have a tiny piece of paperwork for you before the ceremony. Nothing important." I looked back at her house. Sure, I said. Bring it to me. When the call ended, I contacted the one person my family had forgotten about, Grandma's estate attorney, Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca answered on the second ring. When I told her what I had heard, her voice changed immediately. Do not sign anything, she said. Do not confront them yet. Send me the recording and any document they hand you. I'm calling the county recorder's emergency contact and a fraud investigator I know. Claire, listen carefully. Has anyone had access to your driver's license, social security number, or property records? I remembered that Vanessa had photographed my driver's license 2 months earlier. She claimed the wedding venue needed identification for the alcohol permit. Rebecca went silent. We need to assume this plan started long before today, she said. My fear became something sharper. What do I do? Go back to the hotel. Act normal. Get a photograph of every page. I'll handle the legal side. And Claire, tell Daniel. I wanted to protect Daniel from the chaos until after the ceremony. That was my old habit, absorb the damage so everyone else could enjoy the day. But marriage was supposed to begin with trust. I called him. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Do you want to postpone the wedding? The question broke something open in me, not because I wanted to postpone it, but because he gave me the choice my family was trying to take away. No, I said. I want to marry you. I just don't know how to stand in front of them and pretend. Then don't pretend for them, he said. Stay calm for yourself. I'm with you. Back at the hotel, Maya helped me into my dress while I quietly explained the situation. She stared at me through the mirror. Tell me what you need. Keep everyone out of the bridal suite except Vanessa, and record everything. At 1:30, Vanessa arrived carrying a cream-colored folder and wearing the lavender dress I had paid for. She hugged me so warmly that, for a second, I wondered if I had misunderstood. Then she placed the folder on the table. Boring wedding business, she said. The venue needs your signature on the final release. Yellow flags marked 3 signature lines. I opened the folder. The first page looked like a standard vendor form. The second was a photography release. The third page, hidden beneath them, was titled Especial War Antyd. It transferred the Sullivan's Island property from me to a company called Harbor Family Holdings, LLC, for $10 and other valuable consideration. My name had already been typed beneath the signature line. The next document gave Vanessa authority to act as manager of the company. A third document authorized the sale of the cottage to Mercer Coastal Development. This was not an impulsive betrayal. It was a complete transaction. Vanessa stood behind me, smiling into the mirror. You don't need to read all that, she said. We're late. I picked up the pen. Her reflection watched my hand. Where do I sign? I asked. She leaned over and tapped the yellow flag on the deed. Right there. What is Harbor Family Holdings? Her smile disappeared for half a second. The venue's parent company. It was a terrible lie, and she delivered it without blinking. I let the pen touch the paper, then pulled it back. My hands are shaking, I said. Can you get me some water? The moment she stepped into the hall, Maya locked the door. I photographed every page and sent the pictures to Rebecca. Then I returned the photo exactly as I had found it. Vanessa came back with water. Actually, I said, I'll sign after the ceremony. My lipstick needs fixing. Her face tightened. Claire, it has to be done now. Then the wedding can proceed without the release. For the first time that day, she looked afraid. She took the folder and left. 10 minutes later, my mother came in. She closed the door and studied me. Vanessa says you're being difficult. I'm getting married in less than an hour. I think I'm allowed to be difficult. A mother walked closer and lowered her voice. Your sister has done everything for you today. Sign the form so we can all enjoy ourselves. I wanted to ask her how long she had been willing to steal from me. Instead, I smiled. After the ceremony, she squeezed my arm hard enough to leave marks. Do not embarrass this family. Then she left. At 2:20, Rebecca called. The LLC had been formed 6 weeks earlier. Vanessa was the registered agent. Worse, Mercer Coastal had already paid a $25,000 deposit into the company's account. The developer apparently believed I had agreed to sell. Rebecca had contacted Mercer's attorney and told him the deed was fraudulent. He agreed to suspend the transaction and cooperate. Then she gave me the news that turned betrayal into something even darker. Claire, they submitted a deed yesterday. But I haven't signed anything. The deed contains a signature that looks like yours. Derek notarized it. It has not been fully indexed yet, but it was received electronically. My family had not merely planned to trip me. They had already forged my name. Today's signature was probably meant to create a cleaner original in case anyone challenged the electronic filing. Can they take the house? I whispered. No. I've filed an emergency fraud notice and spoken with the recorder. but we need evidence that connects all of them. I looked at myself in the mirror. White dress. Pearl hairpin. Perfect makeup. A bride preparing to walk toward an altar while her family waited to rob her. What evidence? Rebecca explained her plan. It was legal. It was controlled. And it would force them to reveal exactly what they had done. At 3 o'clock, the music began. My father waited at the end of the aisle. He offered me his arm as though he had not discussed selling my home that morning. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. I looked into his eyes. Grandma would have loved today. His steps faltered. "Yes," he said. "She would." I walked down the aisle beside him, but inside, I was walking away from him. When I reached Daniel, he took my hands. He did not ask if I was all right. He knew I was not. He simply held on. We exchanged vows under an old oak tree. When Daniel promised to honor my voice, my choices, and the life we would build together, I nearly cried. Not because the words were romantic. Because, after that morning, they sounded revolutionary. The ceremony ended. Guests cheered. My parents smiled for photographs. Vanessa hugged me and whispered, "We still need that signature." "At the reception," I replied. The reception hut in a restored, brick warehouse by the river. Dinner passed in a blur. My father gave a speech about family loyalty. My mother dabbed her eyes. Vanessa told the room that she had always protected me because I was too trusting for my own good. The irony was almost unbearable. At 7:15, Vanessa cornered me near the bridal suite. Derek stood beside her with a notary bag. "Now," she said. I glanced at Derek. "You're notarizing a vendor release." He avoided my eyes. "It's just procedure." I followed them inside. Maya, Daniel, and my parents came too. Rebecca was waiting in the adjoining room, out of sight, with a retired county fraud investigator named Thomas Bell. Mercer's attorney had joined by video call. Vanessa placed the deed on the table. "Sign," she said. I did not pick up the pen. "Explain what this is." My father closed the door. His pleasant expression vanished. "It puts the cottage into a family company," he said. "It's better for everyone." "You told me it was a venue release." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Because you become irrational whenever we discuss the house." "And Mercer Coastal." All four of them froze. My mother recovered first. "Who told you about Mercer?" "So there is a Mercer." Father stepped toward me. "Claire, we have debts. Vanessa has an opportunity to open her own business. You are marrying a man with a good salary. You don't need an empty beach house. Grandma left it to me." "Grandma favored you?" Vanessa snapped. "You manipulated her when she was sick." That accusation had always been her favorite weapon. This time, it did not wound me. "If you believe the will was invalid, you challenge it in court," I said. "You don't forge a deed." Derek grabbed his bag. "I'm leaving." Thomas belted out of the adjoining room. "I think you should stay." Rebecca followed him, carrying copies of the electronic filing, the LLC records, and the sale agreement. Vanessa's face turned white. My father looked at me as if I had betrayed him. "You set us up." "No," I said. "I gave you one last chance to tell the truth. You chose to hand me the forged documents again." Rebecca placed a small speaker on the table and played the recording from Vanessa's office. Their voices filled the room. "She'll be too emotional to read anything. Once she signs it, the house belongs to us. Claire always wants peace. She'll be furious for a week, then she'll forgive us." My mother sat down heavily. Derek began talking too quickly. "They told me Claire had already agreed. Vanessa said the signature was hers. I only stamped it because." Vanessa turned on him. "Shut up," Thomas calmly said. "Keep going, Mr. Hale." Outside the suite, the band was playing. Guests were laughing, unaware that my family was collapsing 20 feet away. Father pointed at me. "If you report this, we lose everything. You were willing to make me lose Grandma's house. We're your family. Family is not a license to steal." My mother started crying. She said they had been desperate. My father owed nearly $180,000 in back taxes and failed investments. Vanessa had guaranteed part of his debt. They believed the cottage could solve everything. But the truth came out piece by piece. They had not planned to use all the money for debt. Vanessa expected $200,000 for her salon. My parents intended to buy a smaller vacation property in their own names. They had even discussed telling me the cottage had been damaged by a hurricane and needed to be sold quickly. They did not steal because they had no choice. They stole because they had decided their wants mattered more than my rights. Rebecca told them the fraudulent deed had been stopped. Mercer Coastal would seek return of its deposit. The company's bank account was being frozen. She also explained that the evidence would be referred to state investigators on Monday. My father's anger disappeared. He looked suddenly old. "Claire," he said, "please. We can fix this privately." I remembered every birthday I had rearranged for them, every bill I had quietly paid, Every insult I had swallowed to keep the peace. I remembered Vanessa laughing because forgiveness had become predictable. No. You cannot fix a crime by asking the victim to hide it. Vanessa moved toward me. Daniel stepped between us. She stared over his shoulder and said, "You'll regret choosing him over your own blood." I answered, "This is not about choosing him. For once, I'm choosing me." And Thomas escorted Derek into the hall to take a formal statement. Rebecca told my parents and Vanessa to leave the reception. They refused at first. Then Daniel informed venue security. My family walked out through a side entrance while the guests were gathering for cake. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I stood in the bridal suite and cried so hard I could not breathe. Daniel sat beside me on the floor, careful not to step on my dress. He did not tell me they were terrible people. He did not tell me I should be happy they were gone. He said, "You can grieve them and still hold them accountable." That sentence carried me through the rest of the night. I washed my face. Maya repaired my makeup. Then I returned to the reception. We did not explain everything to the guests. Daniel simply announced that a private family emergency had occurred. We cut the cake. We danced. I laughed for real when he stepped on my dress and nearly fell into the band. At the end of the evening, we stood beneath a tunnel of sparklers. The photograph in that moment became my favorite. Not because I looked like a perfect bride. My hair was loose, my eyes were swollen, and one of my earrings was missing. I loved it because I looked free. The investigation lasted 8 months. Derek cooperated and admitted he had notarized the forged signature without my presence. In exchange for his testimony, he received probation, lost his commission, paid a fine, and completed community service. Vanessa was charged with fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy, and filing a false instrument. My father faced conspiracy and financial fraud charges. My mother avoided the most serious charge because the evidence showed she had not prepared the documents, but she pleaded guilty to participating in the attempted deception. I did not ask prosecutors to be cruel. I asked them not to treat family betrayal as less serious, simply because we shared a last name. Vanessa accepted a plea deal that included 14 months in county custody, several years of supervised release, and restitution. My father received home confinement followed by probation because of his age and health, but the financial penalties forced him to sell his oversized house. My mother moved into a small apartment. Mercer recovered its deposit from the frozen account. The company chose not to sue me after the evidence proved I had never approved the sale. My parents told relatives that Daniel had turned me against them. Vanessa posted online that I had destroyed the family over an old cottage. Some relatives believed them. Others called me privately and admitted they had been asked to invest in Vanessa's company without knowing the property transfer was fraudulent. I stopped defending myself to people who preferred a comfortable lie. That was another kind of freedom. 6 months after the wedding, Daniel and I drove to Sullivan's Island. The cottage needed work. Salt air had peeled the paint, a pipe leaked beneath the kitchen sink, and the porch tilted slightly toward the marsh. For years, I had kept the house almost untouched because changing it felt like erasing grandma. But memory is not preserved by refusing to live. Daniel and I repaired the porch. We painted the walls a soft blue. I turned grandma's sewing room into a small office and hung her wedding photograph above the desk. The pearl hairpin rested in a shadow box beside it. One afternoon, I found a letter inside an old recipe book. Grandma had written it during her final year, but I had never seen it. "Claire, if you are reading this, I hope the house is still full of wind, music, and people who make you feel safe. A home is not valuable because of the land beneath it. It is valuable because no one inside it asks you to become smaller, so they can be comfortable. Do not confuse keeping peace with surrendering yourself. Love." Grandma Evelyn. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. Not the broken crying from my wedding night. This was quieter. It felt like something inside me had finally found its proper name. A year after the wedding, Vanessa sent me a letter. She apologized, but the apology still carried conditions. She wrote that prison had changed her, and that I should help her rebuild, because sisters do not abandon each other. I answered with 3 sentences. I hope you rebuild your life honestly. I will not finance it, hide what happened, or accept blame for its consequences. Forgiveness, if it will not restore your access to me. My mother called and said my response was cold. No, I told her. It is clear. That was the last time we spoke for many months. People sometimes ask whether revenge made me happy. The truth is, I never poured sugar into anyone's gas tank. I never humiliated them on social media. I never tried to make their pain equal mine. My revenge was more complete than that. I stopped rescuing them from consequences. I told the truth. I protected the house. I let the law reach the people who believed my love made them untouchable. Then I built a life so peaceful that their chaos could no longer enter it. Daniel and I now spend part of every summer at the cottage. Sometimes we invite friends for long dinners on the repaired porch. When the wind moves through the palmetto trees, I think of Grandma and the choice she made when she left the house to me. She was not only giving me property, she was giving me a test I did not know I would have to take. On my wedding day, my family believed the perfect bride would smile, sign, forgive, and stay silent. They were right about one thing. I did become a bride that day, but I also became the woman they should never have underestimated. And in the end, I did not lose my family because I exposed their betrayal. They lost me the moment they mistook my love for a signature.